we're talking about helping learners embrace the fullness of Catholic social teaching. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And as I talked with some of you, I can tell many of you are very involved in Catholic social teaching in some way or another, and are very excited about that too. Pope Francis certainly has talked a lot about Catholic social teaching from the very beginning when it became obvious that he was going to be elected Pope, and he says one of the cardinals said to him, "Don't forget the poor." And he certainly has talked about multiple themes of Catholic social teaching since then. He's full of surprises, isn't he? I heard a story about a pizza delivery guy near the Vatican that got a phone call. This pizza shop got a phone call late at night one night, and somebody orders a pizza, and he says, "Okay, well, what name should I put on it?" He says, "Well, this is Pope Francis." He says, "Oh, Pope Francis, yeah, and I need it delivered to Casa Santa Marta if you could." "Okay, Your Holiness, we'll do that then." So the guy goes with the pizza to be delivered. He goes to the gates there to get into Vatican City, and he says, "I have a pizza for Pope Francis." And this Swiss guard, whoa, hey, you're not coming in here with a big package and coming. No, really, it's just a pizza. He called and he wants the pizza delivered to him, and Swiss guard says, "Well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll let you in, but you got to give me half the tip that he gives you." So he says, "Well, okay." So he goes up, delivers the pizza, and then he realizes, I don't want to go out the same way. I don't want to run into that guy again. Forget that. I'm going to go out a different way. So he goes out a different way, but sure enough, he encounters the same Swiss guard. And he says, "Excuse me, we had an agreement. Do you remember what it was?" He said, "Yeah, you wanted me to give you half the tip." He said, "Okay, well, give me half the tip." He says, "Okay, are you ready?" That's not a true story. But Pope Francis is full of surprises, isn't he? So I'm going to post the notes from today, and I try to let people know in advance, because otherwise I get in trouble if everybody writes a lot of stuff and then I say, "And by the way, the notes are posted here." So here they are. It's going to be at sharingcatholicfaith.com. You go to my 2017 speaking calendar and scroll underneath that, and you'll see helping learners embrace the fullness of Catholic social teaching right there. And so the notes will be there. I also post direct links to those notes on my Twitter and Facebook accounts. Also, that's a great place to ask follow-up questions. We only have an hour this morning, and so unfortunately that limits my time for discussion, which I hate. But we can continue the discussion on social media. If you have some additional ideas or some additional questions, ideas probably ought to go to Facebook so that you can actually write the whole idea. Questions could go either place. But please feel free to connect there as well. I also want to say, anytime you get up these days in a society this polarized and speak about social teaching, you run the risk of getting into some trouble. And so I want to say, if I say anything today that sounds ambiguous, or you're kind of wondering, which way did he mean that? I mean it in whatever way is most consistent with these three documents that I fully endorse and support, okay? So the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship by the U.S. Bishops, and the U.S. Adult Catechism. What I say today, I intend to be in the spirit of those documents, and those are great resources for getting further information on Catholic social teaching. But we live in a very divided country, don't we? Yeah. When I initially submitted this topic months and months ago, I mean, not long after this time of year when they started collecting topics for the MAC, I had no idea that at this point we would still be talking about the election so much. But look where we are. We still are in a nation that's very, more polarized than I think than ever, with very strong opinions on all sides. But I think also, and sadly, we are in a church that's divided around these issues. A 2016 Pew Research Center poll shows that 54% of self-identified Catholics say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And a 2014 Pew Research Center poll shows a large number of Catholics in disagreement with the U.S. bishops over immigration reform, with 47% saying a rise in deportations is a good thing, and 20% saying undocumented immigrants should not be allowed to stay in the U.S. even if they meet certain requirements. So we certainly have people who are at odds with the official Catholic position on these things, because there really are official Catholic teachings on these issues. So that caused me to think, what is it that makes us diverge from church teachings on some of these things? Here are what I think are some of the possible causes, and then the needs based on these causes. One is that I think people today in the United States identify with a political party or group much more than they identify with their faith. So people are more Democrat or more Republican than they are Catholic as far as their self-identification. And I think this points to a bigger issue that we have in the church in the United States. Sherry Waddell points this out in her book, Forming Intentional Disciples. Some of you may be familiar with that book. That as a group, U.S. adults have little attachment to their faith. There's a 2015 study by the Pew Research Center that indicates that 53% of adults in the United States have left the faith of their childhood. 53%. The number actually is slightly higher for Catholics than it is Protestants. And so we look at that statistic and we say, well, that's okay because they come back, right? And actually 9% come back. But that leaves us with 44% who leave and are gone for good. That only points to the fact that we have little attachment to the faith of our childhood in our culture. So one of the things that I think we need is attention to the process of attachment. As a psychologist who works as a national catechetical consultant, one of my interests is looking at how brain development relates to and connects with learning about the faith and being formed in the faith. When we look at when attachment occurs in brain development, we know that the part of the brain that's responsible for attachment is growing most rapidly during the first 6 years of life, the first 5 or 6 years of life. We know, I think most people know about that attachment window in the first year to year and a half for infants attaching to their primary caretakers, right? So we think it's very important that a bond is formed between an infant and primary caretaker in that first year to year and a half. But in those subsequent 5 years or so, the child is also learning to attach to other people in his or her life. And we, for the most part in the church, ignore the time that the attachment area of the brain is growing the fastest. So we'll baptize an infant, and then we'll say, come back in 6 or 7 years, and come back for First Communion. But we have very little to offer in between. So what happens? We wait until the time of life when the part of the brain that's growing, beginning in first grade and up, is the cerebral cortex is really growing the fastest. And so that's the facts and figures part of the brain where they learn new vocabulary words, they can memorize stuff. So it's great for an academic kind of learning environment because kids are much better equipped to begin to memorize things. And we have some kids that go all the way through, I know a number of you from Catholic schools, we have some kids that go all the way through Catholic school, from first grade all the way through 12th grade, or from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and then they graduate and they leave the church. And we have other people in our parishes who go all the way through parish formation every year, and fewer and fewer families do that. But we have some families who do that, and we think, oh well, this we've definitely got this one, and then as a young adult that child leaves the faith. And we go, what happened? They know their faith better than this. And the truth is, they do know their faith better than that, but are they attached to their faith, right? And we know that the time of life when the part of the brain responsible for attachment is growing the fastest is in those first 5 or 6 years of life. So what are we doing to nurture faith at that time? And particularly, not just kind of any kind of random faith formation for preschoolers. Sometimes you see programs that are basically kind of collections of Bible stories people thought would be cute to teach them, and workbooks and things like that, and coloring sheets. I think what we need to be all about is active learning approaches that focus on getting to know Jesus and getting to know his church, and building that attachment and helping it be wired into the architecture of the brain as the brain develops. That's what we're made for. It's what we're made for, right? So we need to pay attention to the process of attachment. You didn't think I was going there with Catholic social teaching when you came in this morning, did you? That we were going to talk about preschool. But I think it bears mention, because I think, we need to pay attention to attachment. Secondly, another reason why I think our nation, and particularly our church, is so divided about these issues is because of the secularization of modern culture today, that encourages a compartmentalization of faith, right? That says, it's fine for you to have your faith, but you keep it in the walls of the church on Sundays. Don't bring that out into the public square. Don't be talking about that. What do they call it when somebody mentions their faith in any public kind of forum? It's shoving your religion down people's throat, right? That's the only opinion that you're not entitled to in our free society is the opinion that's formed based on your faith, on your religion. And because there's been such a push to compartmentalize faith in our society today, I think that many people see faith as sort of an extracurricular activity, a life enhancement app, if you will. That a little add-on that they do. We'll do this on Sundays, and that'll be good. We'll get the kids enrolled in sacramental prep or in religious education. That'll be good extracurricular activity for them too. Finally, I think we have a general lack of understanding of Catholic teaching around these issues. We had in my own diocese, our director of parasocial ministry did a series in the diocesan newspaper on faithful citizenship, using those 7 key teachings of Catholic social teaching from the bishop that we'll talk about in a little bit. She got all kinds of hate mail about it. This is socialist, this stuff that you're writing. And she looks at me, she says, I'm just writing what the bishop said, But I think there's such a lack of information about, or lack of formation around Catholic social issues, that you have folks that just aren't well formed around these things. So we have this need for adult formation around these issues. What do Catholics believe regarding social teachings? How do we live it out? And how do we articulate it to others? Now, I'm going to talk about some reasons why we might want to focus in particular on kids and teens as well. So very often today, especially in settings like the MAP Congress, we're talking about the need for better quality and more adult faith formation. And I certainly would echo that, especially when it comes to these issues. But there are some particular reasons why we might also want to focus on kids and teens when it comes to Catholic social teaching. And this is what they are. First, it's in large part at least the audience we have right now. If we look at our parishes around the country, I speak in about 50 cities around the country every year. And one thing that I think nearly every place I speak has in common is that it's mostly kids and teens being formed in the faith. That's a sad situation, and it's one that we need to change. But for right now, this is the audience that we have. Secondly, though kids and teens are in the midst of a more general process of conscience development, it's easier to learn it correctly the first time than it is to unlearn what you've already kind of entrenched yourself in. And this is what we're seeing when we see people that are more Republican or more Democrat than they are Catholic, right? Because they've already entrenched themselves in certain points of view and ways of seeing these issues. And when they're confronted with Catholic teaching on this, they end up sort of doing a pick and choose kind of thing. And so you have some folks that are really, pro-life Catholics when it comes to issues around abortion, but maybe not so pro-life when it comes to issues around caring for the poor or immigrants or some of these other issues that are also very important. So I think it's easier to learn it right the first time, and when we look at the stages of conscience development, those years in between, say, 6 and 13 are particularly critical for the formation of conscience, because those are the years, especially later on in that age span, when kids really begin to internalize their standards of right and wrong. Also, the psychological principle of inoculation is really relevant to this time of life. So this is a term that behavioral psychologists have to describe kind of a psychological phenomenon where somebody, when you have vaccines, when you have inoculations, they have usually a weakened form of the virus that they give you and builds up your antibodies, and so then you don't get sick, right? So this is sort of like that, except with ideas. So here's what you can do. If you start with young kids, you can say, okay, now you're going to also hear people say this. You're going to hear people say, well, we don't have any responsibility to take care of those immigrants because they broke the law. Or you're going to hear people say, well, it's a woman's right to choose. And here's what you need to think about when you hear that argument. And you get them under the surface a little bit, because a lot of times these are just slogans that are thrown out there, right? So inoculating them against these heresies regarding social teaching by helping them understand the truth about it and the deeper issues involved. And so that's that principle of inoculation. Again, if you tell people this is what you're going to hear, then when they hear that, they're going to go, oh yeah, they told me I was going to hear this, and here's what I think about that. When they hear that slogan, well, it's always a woman's right to choose, they think, well, I knew I was going to hear that, but also, what about the choice of this unique human being that's growing inside of her? So this is that principle of inoculation. Also, past efforts at changing social consensus by focusing on youth have been effective, for good or for ill. When we look at everything from the golden generation of saints in France, the youth that really set the church on fire there, to tragic examples of this, like the Hitler Youth, or what happened under Pol Pot in Cambodia. When people focus on the youth and they educate them with certain ideas, it can really have an impact on society in the next generation. So there are lots of reasons why we can have hope, even though this might be the only audience that we have. Because you really can change the world, particularly around social issues, when you're working with kids and teens. Here's why I think Catholic social teaching can resonate, especially with teens. They're beginning to gain more capacity for empathy, so they're really beginning to be able to put themselves in the shoes of other people. Sometimes they over-personalize it, or they think that it feels for that other person exactly how it would feel for them. But the point is that they're really making that effort to do that. They also have a strong sense of justice, and that can be perceived differently for young kids than it is for teens and older. So for young kids, beginning in about age 6, this is when they learn that the world works according to rules, right? So I have a magic trick that I show kids that I work with, where it's a little sleight of hand trick where I make something disappear and then reappear. And it never fails. The preschoolers will always, kind of look at their parents and say, look at that, Dr. White is magic. Did you see that? He's magic. Now, once they get to like 6, 7, 8, do you think that they say, I'm magic? What do they ask me instead? How'd you do that? Right, because they know the world works according to certain rules and things don't just disappear and reappear, right? And so how many of you have substitute taught in a first grade classroom before? Anybody in here? So what happens when you go in there and you do something a little different from the teacher? Excuse me, that's not how we do it, right? They've got to let you, because the world works according to certain rules. Well, so the sense of justice, beginning there in first grade and really continuing in those elementary school years, throughout those elementary school years, the sense of justice is based on what the rules are. and right and wrong. And so this justice is based on this idea that if somebody does a good thing, then they should be rewarded. If they do a bad thing, they should be punished. As we get older, we learn that that doesn't always happen that way, does it? Sometimes we're punished for doing good things and rewarded for doing the wrong thing, right? And we can either get really jaded and disillusioned, or we can be very determined to change that or to stand up for the disenfranchised or the least of those among us. And so this is something that I think teens very often can get behind, this idea of standing up for somebody who's been marginalized. Also, they're still at this time of life where they're more idealistic and less cynical than I think some of us sometimes can be, and so they still see that potential that the world can be changed. And I think we need to also. Remember that verse in Scripture when Jesus says, "Behold, I make all things new." We never know when God will make all things. I mean, we could get really depressed over that 53% of people that leave the faith of their childhood, and I think we should be concerned about that. But we also know that God has the power to renew His church in the United States. Amen? And so, teens, I think, come with this natural spirit of idealism that says anything is possible. And we need them in our church. We need that kind of energy. So I'm going to go through the 7 teachings of Catholic social teaching, and I'm going to talk about how we might say those things both for younger learners as well as older learners, teens and up, and the different language that we might use to help folks understand that. And then also talk about some potential activities that we can do in the school setting, in a parish religion class setting, and in a parish family setting as well. So, number 1, life and dignity of the human person. I think for younger kids, what we can say is, because God made each person, we should be kind and fair to everyone. We should try to protect others, because every life is important to God. For teens, we can say, God created each one of us, and every person is unique and valuable to God. We should treat each person with dignity, from the unborn to the elderly, from people of different races to people with special needs, to the prisoner on death row. There's no compromising, is there, on this teaching? Because the moment that we give in one place, it's a slippery slope. If we say that the life of the prisoner on death row is somehow less valuable, then all life then has been denigrated at that point. Every human life is less valuable at that point. And so we must be consistent on this issue. We have to teach consistently on this. One of the things that we can do is to have, and we can even involve young kids in this, maternity shelter supplies drive. You do hear the accusation sometimes that Catholics and other people who are pro-life are only pro-birth. I don't think that's true, by the way. And I think, the group that we have in here is a testament to that, because you've come to talk about all of these Catholic social teachings. But I think one of the ways that we can really demonstrate that is by doing some good for women who are choosing life and choosing to have their babies, and helping to support them through a maternity shelter supplies drive, an angel tree, something like that. Also, to do work on pro-life legislative advocacy. Many dioceses have a legislative advocacy day. Sometimes they'll take the high school students, for example, to that legislative advocacy day to talk to their state senators and representatives about some of these issues. Also, even younger kids can write letters about these issues. Even though they're not voting age yet, they're still constituents, and they can certainly express their opinions. And maybe the representatives, or at least the aides, will take a little more time to read these letters because they're written by young people and they think that's pretty cute. So sometimes they can really do some good that way. But more importantly, we've really taught them to speak up to their elected representatives, which I think is a skill that they'll use for the rest of their life. I remember being 10 years old and meeting with my U.S. representative back home where I grew up in Oklahoma, and I mean, now I think about that and I think, what did I even talk about with him? And, how generous he was to actually give me an hour to sit down. I mean, this was a guy who, was on congressional committees and stuff. But, it gave me this sense that I could voice my opinion to my elected officials. Second teaching, Catholic social teaching, the call to family community participation. For younger children, we can say God gives us families and communities because he knows it would not be good for us to live our lives alone. In families and parish communities, we work together to take care of one another and to become the people God made us to be. For teens, we can say because we're created in the image of God, who's a communion of persons, we have a responsibility to build a sense of communion with our families, our parish, and our local community. It's really integral to our faith that we are created for community. The foundational mystery of our faith is that God is a Trinity. God himself is a communion of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And made in God's image, we are created to be in communion with others. In fact, Pope John Paul II, in his Theology of the Body, points out that in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, when it says, in the divine image he created him, male and female he created them, that Scripture is teaching us not only that each of us individually is created in God's image and likeness. And certainly Scripture is teaching that. But Pope John Paul II says Scripture is also teaching us there that we are created male and female in God's image, that we're created to be in communion with each other, that we're created to be a communion of persons. So we are created for communion. And this is the first and most basic way that we're created to be in communion. But also Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2 and promised, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Education for community life is one of the 6 essential tasks of catechesis mentioned in the General Directory for Catechesis. Are you guys all familiar with the General Directory? Don't tell me if you're not, because I don't want to know. This is a very important document. So if you don't know what the General Directory for Catechesis is, go home and Google it, because it's all online. You can read it online. But there are 6 basic tasks that we have as catechists, as people who form it. This is our handbook. The GDC is our handbook for how we form others in the faith. Our handbook from the Universal Church on this. There are 6 basic tasks of catechesis, and number 5 is education for community life. I won't tell you what the other 5 are. You'll have to go look that up on your own. But in the General Directory for Catechesis, it says this: catechesis prepares the Christian to live in community and to participate actively in the life and mission of the church. So how can we build community among our learners? Families today, and this is not going to be a big shock to you who are involved in ministry, but families often find it a challenge to come together, don't they? Because of busy schedules and conflicting priorities and other practical issues. I was a DRE in a parish for a couple of years, and I remember sometimes around registration time, we would get phone calls, and we had classes on multiple nights, and so we'd kind of have to sort it out with parents when would be the best time for that family to be enrolled in religious ed. And sometimes it would be, Sarah has, she's got volleyball on Tuesday and gymnastics on Wednesday and ballet on Thursday, and I'd be thinking, well, where do we fit in this list of priorities, right? There's so many different conflicting priorities for families today. But making connections with our parish community is an essential aspect of what it means to be Catholic. We don't have a solitary tradition of it's not Jesus and me in the Catholic Church, it's Jesus and us, right? And so we celebrate and we pray together as brothers and sisters. Hebrews 10:25 says we should not stay away from our assembly, as is the custom of some, but encourage one another. So facilitating those connections, building community among our families is one way we can help our families to appreciate the value of togetherness and build relationships that are going to last for years to come. So how can we do that? I think we've got to communicate on an ongoing basis with parents and families, in person when possible, as well as through email, newsletters, social media. When I was a DRE, my goal was to try to think of 5 ways to get a message out. Anytime I had to get the message out. And it sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, you can have an announcement at Mass. You can print an announcement in the bulletin. You can put it up on the church website. You could send a flyer home with religious ed. You could put a poster up on the door as they come into the religious ed facility or to the school. So there are lots of different ways to get these messages out. I think also it's important, if possible, to arrange some optional meetings for families outside of the regular sessions. Again, both in the school setting as well as in the parish setting. Family potluck dinners, class plays, even attending a family movie as a group. One of the things my wife and I did when we were catechists, we were second grade catechists for 7 years. And now she's a DRE in a parish of 7,000 families, so she can't be a catechist anymore because she's a catechist of catechists now. But in any case, when we were working with these second graders, often in the wintertime there would be a family movie showing around Christmas break or something. And so we would get in touch with the families and say, hey, in January before classes started up again, let's all meet together and have a family movie night and go see, I remember one year, The Prince of Egypt was the movie that had just come out. So I'm dating myself now, but some time back. But anyway, and so we all met at the movie, and parents came with their kids, so there wasn't a situation where we needed to do like a field trip permission or something like that. But just getting everybody together. Another thing that we did was after First Reconciliation, we all got together at a local pizza place and celebrated together, had dinner together. Usually after First Communion, they have their own receptions and things like that, but not usually after First Reconciliation, so it was a great time to get together and do that. But find some ways to get those families together. Consider hosting some sessions for parents and children together, so that parents can experience the sessions for themselves and they can become more skilled at talking with their kids about the faith. Giving that framework where they're kind of called to talk with their kids about the faith in session gives them some experience. It makes it part of their repertoire so that they can then continue that conversation. If you're using the Alive in Christ curriculum, one of the things that we have with ours is the free family and faith sessions online. That are already done for you with videos and questions to ask and everything. And because every grade level is organized according to the same unit headings, you can get families with multiple kids together. Everybody's on the Trinity unit, from week 4 to week 6. And so you can get everybody together for a session, a family session on the Trinity. So you have a parent with a second grader and a 5th or 6th grader, and you can do that together as a family. And that's available to you for free if you're using that. So please take advantage of that on the website. But if you're not using that curriculum, we'd love for you to switch. But if you're not, look for what kinds of family gathered sessions does your particular publisher offer. What can you do to gather people together? Because I think it's a very powerful. There is nothing more powerful to get people to change behavior than getting them to practice the behavior. Right? We can send them instructions for how to do it. We can send them resources for how to do it. But when we have them in front of us and we get them to practice it, get a parent practicing talking about the faith with their kids, that's what brings about the behavior change. I can tell you as a psychologist, because it actually makes it part of their behavioral repertoire from that point forward. So family gathered sessions are a great thing to do. The next aspect of Catholic social teaching I want to touch on is rights and responsibilities of the human person. And here I think we can use the same general definition for everybody, the same general description of this one. We can say because God made every person, everyone has rights and responsibilities. Rights are freedoms or things that every person needs and should have. Responsibilities are our duties or the things we must do. When I work with teens in counseling teens that are starting to go down a wrong path, one of the things I find that many of those teens have in common is for whatever reason, and sometimes it's parenting, sometimes it's other things, but for whatever reason, they have not connected rights and responsibilities. They haven't connected the freedoms they have with the things that they are called to be responsible for. And if you can't do that, you're going to learn a very powerful life lesson in a very stark way as an adult, aren't you? Because even something as simple as driving, your privilege, your freedom to drive depends on your fulfilling your responsibility to drive responsibly and to follow the laws and things like that, and on and on. I think we have a lot of indignant young adults in the workplace today because, and I don't mean to just pick on young adults, but this is a thing, I promise you. Because we have a generation of people that were raised where everybody got a trophy no matter what you did, and you got a pat on the back just for being there. And that's not how the real world works, is it? We have responsibilities. We have things that we have to do in order to get those pats on the back if we want them. Having some group and family discussions of rights and responsibilities, I think, can be great. For teachers in Catholic school or for catechists in the parish religion program, using those initial class sessions to have a group conversation about what kinds of guidelines do we want to have for our group. What should be the rules around here so that we can make sure that we are respectful of each other and we listen to each other and we learn new things together. It's amazing because some people are afraid to open that conversation, especially with older kids. They're afraid to open that. Well, I think we should be able to do whatever we want, and we should, but actually that's not usually how it goes. Usually they're actually even a little harder on themselves than we would be on them. Sometimes we've got to say, let's ease that back a little bit, But the good thing about that, when you have that conversation, is then you really have investment from all members of the group as well. You have that buy-in that they know that they're accountable and responsible to each other because they came up with that group contract together. The next area of Catholic social teaching I want to talk about is the option for the poor and vulnerable. For younger children, we can say our church teaches that we should have special love and care for those who are poor and put their needs first. When people need food, drink, clothing, housing, or medical care, or when they're lonely, we should try extra hard to help. For teens, we can say we should treat people in need the same way we would treat Jesus himself. We should give special priority to people who are hungry, thirsty, homeless, or alone. So how can we begin to apply this with our learners? One of the most important things, remember what I told you earlier about behavior change. Nothing changes behavior like putting it into practice, right? And so, I'm afraid that a lot of our discussion of care for others has been, things like workbook pages where we circle the people who are being kind to others and things like that. That's not particularly effective in instilling new behaviors. Plus, it's kind of boring, okay? So I think one of the other things we could do instead is we could actually call kids to act out some of these kinds of things. So say, for example, you were working with a group of fourth graders and you wanted to talk about including everyone, respecting everybody's dignity, or a call to community, or things like that. You could say, okay, pretend like over here, you three over there on this side, you're the cool lunch table, right? And everybody wants to be a part of this lunch group. And then this guy over here is the new guy at school, and you guys are still trying to figure out whether he's cool or not. But he's over there by himself. He doesn't have anybody to have lunch with. Show me what you could do to honor his dignity as an individual created in God's image and likeness. And then, and what they'll do when you say, show me what you would do, they know what the right answer is. It might not actually be what they would do, but guess what? Actually doing it, actually acting it out makes them more likely to do it in everyday life. Because the more we practice something, the more likely we are to really do it. It becomes part of our being. And it's a neurological phenomenon. It's because of the way our brains are wired that new axons and dendrites form new connections in the brain when we have a new pattern of behavior that we've never done before. And next time it gets even easier and quicker to do the same thing. It's how we cultivate the virtues by building good habits, right? And so, acting those things out can be so important. Having some simple service activities and projects that we can involve our learners in. Here are a couple that most of my really good practical ideas come from my wife, so I want to give her the credit for this. My wife, Anna, came up with these two things. But so buy a package of big white tube socks, that come in packages of like 50,000, bulk packages. And give each one of the kids one of those big long tube socks and say, sometime this week when your mom or dad goes to the store, ask if you can come along and if you can fill this up with things from that trial size aisle where they have shampoos and shaving creams and soap and things like that. And so collect those together and then have somebody from the local homeless shelter come out and pick those up and talk with the kids about what they do. Our shelters are very often needing some of these basic self-care supplies, and talk about how that helps people, helps to respect their dignity by helping them get cleaned up. Also, another project that my wife has done is this trick or treat so all can eat, where she would send out along with, she'd give every child one of these bags for Halloween. And this is not their candy collection bag. This is a companion to their candy collection bag. So they have their usual thing they collect the candy in, but then as they go around to each house, after they get the candy, they say, and also, St. Austin's Parish is collecting canned food and other non-perishables to stock our food pantry. Would you be willing to donate something? So two things that does that I think is great. One is that it gets the good word out about how our local parish community is caring for the poor in our community. The second thing, though, it does that I think is equally important is it invites other people from the community to participate with us in that work. So we really are evangelizing also by calling people to that same kind of good work. And it's a door-to-door operation. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses or something. Going door to door. I think it's wonderful. And then an activity for very young children, for preschoolers and kindergartners. I call this one, How Can I Help? So in one part of the room, you put a little dog bowl, plastic dog bowl. In another, you put a stuffed dog. In one area of the room, you put a doll, a baby doll. Another place, a baby blanket. In one area of the room, you put some spilled crayons or pencils. And another place, you put a pencil case. And then you go around to each area. You say, oh, look at this little stuffed dog. He's trying to tell me something. You can ham it up with the little. Oh, you know what he said? He said he is so hungry. I wonder if anybody can find a way to help. So they look around, they find the dog bowl, and they bring it to him, and he pretends like he's eating. Oh, he's so happy. Thank you. And then we go to the baby doll, and we say, oh, look at this baby. Oh, she is shivering. I think she's cold. I wonder if anybody can find a way to help. And they look around, they find the blanket, and they bring it up, and they wrap up the baby in the blanket. And then we say, oh, look, there are pencils, crayons spilled out on the floor there. I wonder if anybody can find a way to help. And they find the case and they put them in there. So what I like about this kind of activity is we're not just helping young children identify who's helping. We are helping them learn how to look for ways to help in the world around them, which is really what Catholic social teaching calls us to, doesn't it? Not to sit around and be asked to help, but to go out and seek those in need, right? And to help in that way. There is a project that started in Austin, where I live, with one Catholic school. And it quickly spread to other Catholic schools and public schools around our city, and then to other cities in Texas, and then to other states. So now it's a nationwide phenomenon called a legacy of giving. And they have these gigantic drives for things like coats and canned foods and things like that. And I'd like to just show you what this looks like in action. And remember that when you see all of these different people, all these different schools, including public schools in our community, this was started by one parent at one Catholic school. I'd love to see our Catholic parishes and schools be leaders in our communities of the good work that's being done for those who have less. And that brings me to the next Catholic social teaching we have to talk about today, the dignity of work and the rights of workers. For younger kids, we could say jobs allow people to work together with God and His creation. Work is a part of God's plan for people. And everyone who's able to work should work, either in the home or in a job outside the home. For teens, we can say all adults have a right and responsibility to work. Everyone should have access to meaningful work inside or outside the home. Workers should be treated fairly by their employers. Here, I think one of the things we could do is have an activity where we design our own business and ask these kinds of questions. Who would you hire? How would you decide what to pay them? What rights would your workers have? How would company decisions be made? And get into some conversations about that in light of Catholic social teaching around the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Next, solidarity of the human family. For younger kids, we can say, people around the world are different in many ways, but one way we're all alike is that God made us. We're one human family. For teens, we can say our world includes people of different nations, races, cultures, beliefs, and economic levels, but God created each one of us. We are one human family. One of the things we can do here is invite participants to share with the class some ways that they've been peacemakers at school or at home or in their neighborhoods, so that they can get ideas from their peers about ways that they can do that. Work together to identify nations or parts of the world where wars are currently going on, and brainstorm alternative ways that these places could reach their goals without war or conflict. So one activity that has been used, especially in some schools, to do just this is called the World Peace Game. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but there's a film that debuted at a film festival that we have in Austin called South by Southwest about the World Peace Game. And I'd like for you to just see what this looks like in action.
Relationships are important in education. That really maybe even the key to teaching well is the relationship you have with a student. If you're able to touch their mind, fine, but if you can touch their heart, then the mind contact lasts longer and goes deeper, I think. Welcome to the World Peace Game. I'm very, very sorry, but you're going to have fun today. This is the World Peace Game, and it's about 28 years old. It's a political science simulation. And the game basically pits 4 or 5 countries against each other in every way, politically, socially, militarily, and economically. And they have to use their imagination, use their thinking skills to think their way out of these problems that they're pitched into head first.
It's a game that makes you think really hard. It makes you really think about what's really going on in the world.
What I think is you can't be all about war, and you can't be, again, this may sound bad, but you can't be all about peace.
Yeah, not like all like flowers and grassy fields and
solar
panels.
They threaten you, Miss Williams, and your cabinet to destroy the refinery complex if they are challenged. I want it to be so thrilling that they don't want to do without it, but so challenging that they almost can't do it. That kind of tension is where learning occurs. They have that love and fear, and that learning just torques on that kind of mismatch.
There has to be a way we can use this. We have to figure that out. We can use this volcano, use this eruption to make something good happen.
If you look on the World Peace Game map, he has like that much oil.
So does Caden. And Caden's our complete ally.
I don't want to be a rebel.
She doesn't want to. We can make a treaty.
I hope that they take away every creative thinking tool, every critical thinking tool they can, and they have a confidence that they can solve any problem, they can deal with anything. As I said to them today, if just one of you is in position to leverage something good for the world, you may save us all. And that's what I'm naively hoping might happen.
You never know if one of the kids participating in that simulation at school will grow up to be one of the adults that really saves the world in a time of crisis. One of the things I love in that trailer is, and I don't know if you can hear it well enough, but there's a point where the game tells them that there's been a horrible volcanic eruption in one of the countries, and it's affecting the community. And there's one girl that says, we have to find a way to use this eruption to do some good, which I thought was just so wonderful to be thinking in that direction. And then finally, care for God's creation. For young children, here we can say, God created the whole world. Our church teaches that God gave the plants and animals for the good of all people. We need to work to take care of the plants and animals in the places where they live so everyone can enjoy them now and in the future. For teens, we can say God made people the stewards of creation. That means humans have a special responsibility to care for everything God made. There's a great article online, it's on our Sunday Visitor website, by Holly Taylor Kuhlman on ways that families can live the message of Laudato Si. Remember Laudato Si, a couple of papal documents ago when we had the one on the environment. I think this is a great one to revisit, especially around Lent and maybe an Advent as well, when we start looking for some simple everyday ways that we can change some of our behavior to help families know some practical ways to live out the message of Laudato Si. I think is a good start for them. I also want to recommend a book called Saints and Social Justice that by Brandon Vaught that goes through these 7 themes of Catholic social teaching and identifies saints that are particularly good examples around those particular themes. Brandon Vaught is a young adult himself, and he chooses a few young adult saints, among others, here that I think can be especially good examples for our high school and even younger kids. You know, advertisers, one of the phenomena in advertising is usually you'll see in advertisements directed towards kids that seem a little too old to be playing with that toy in the commercial, right? And the reason is because advertisers know, the research shows, when kids see slightly older kids doing something, it looks a whole lot cooler to them. Right? And so when we use some of these young saints, that's a great way to give them a very powerful example. So I promised in the description 5 ways to help kids and teens embrace the fullness of Catholic social teaching, and I'm hoping that I articulated all 5 of these, but just in case, let's review. Start young. Remember that attachment and how we want to start very young. Use developmentally appropriate language. Encourage kids to brainstorm and dream. Role play and practice acting with justice and mercy. And then finally, provide positive role models. And I want to close with a story. My wife and I have done a lot of mission work with a tribal community in the rainforest in Central America. In fact, when we started going to see them, they had only been discovered by the outside world for about 15 years. They knew they were there, but the outside world didn't know they were there. And so they were living in a hunter-gatherer society, much like they had for thousands of years. And one of the things that particularly impressed us when we first got there, we had taken, we knew we were going into a really unique situation. And so we had taken some things to kind of show the community that we were there as friends and, you know, give some gifts and things like that. And one of the things we brought for the kids were Twizzlers. We weren't sure they would know what they were, but, you know, we brought some Twizzlers. And we handed them back to some of the kids in the village when we got there, and they ran off to the other side of the village. And I thought, oh, you know, I said to my wife, they're going to go and get the other kids. I hope we don't run out of Twizzlers. But what happened was when the other kids came, each of them had a little piece. Because these kids had gotten this from us, and what they were really excited about was having something they could go and share with the other kids. Another thing that we saw with this group of kids, they would all get together and play in like this central area that the huts were arranged around. And there were probably about 30 kids or so, 30, 35 kids. We had brought a beach ball that we blew up and gave to them, and they were having a lot of fun knocking that around and jumping up and bouncing it off their head and things like that. And all the kids were playing this at once until one little boy jumped up. He was probably about 8 years old. He jumped up in the air to hit the ball with his head, but he came back down on a sharp rock and cut his foot. And they don't wear shoes. They don't have shoes there. So he's got a cut foot now, and he sits down and starts crying. What I saw next amazed me, because what happened was when the kids noticed that he was hurt and sat down, they grabbed the ball, they stopped the ball, they all formed a circle around him until the adults came to help. And I thought, wow, you know, if that had happened in the United States, I hope at least they wouldn't have run over him while they were playing, but I'm not sure the game would have stopped. And so that kind of care for the community, that kind of eagerness to share, that kind of noticing when somebody is hurt and needs some help and rallying around that person, I know that kids can be raised with that because I've seen it. I've seen it. You know, we're not an inherently selfish people. We're created by God for love. And so let's go out with that hope and you know, let's go out with that determination to change the world. I want to mention again, for more information, that Saints and Social Justice book by Brandon Vaught, I think, is a great resource. All of the descriptions of the Catholic social teachings that I used today, the developmentally appropriate language, comes from our series Alive in Christ, which is a 1st through 8th grade series for Catholic schools. There's one for Catholic schools, and there's a version for Catholic parishes. We'd love for you to check that out. One of the things that we did, and I was on the writing team for Alive in Christ, we very intentionally covered all 7 themes of Catholic social teaching at every grade level. It's not haphazard, it's not an afterthought. It's very intentional at every grade level, because I think we have to be that intentional today.